Now, the ANC, the ruling party, faces widespread criticism for the country's socio-political problems as the governing party. Now, economic hardships and rolling power cuts have plunged more South Africans into poverty, with communities left in a vulnerable state. But writer Nick Hedley says South Africa's weak opposition parties should carry some of the blame. To discuss this further, we're joined by Nick, who's joining us via Zoom all the way in Barcelona in Spain. Thanks so much for joining us, Nick. I think it's probably refreshing for even the ruling party to hear that this is not entirely squarely on their shoulders in terms of the true state of South Africa.
Morning, Cindy. So I'm not necessarily trying to absolve the ruling party of blame. It absolutely should take the bulk of the criticism. It has pretty much dismantled all of the foundations of the South African economy and jobs market over the past 15 years. What I'm arguing is that opposition parties should take some of the blame because they've completely failed to offer an alternative that voters see as viable and palatable. So the DA, for example, has gone backwards. It lost 3 million votes in the 2021 local government elections compared to 2016. The only reason it's sort of held up at a decent percentage is that voters are staying away from the polls in general, and the ruling party is getting a lot less than they used to, but so is the DA. So the kind of concept, or what I'm trying to argue, is that voters don't see any alternative, so they'd rather just stay at home. And I think that's why opposition parties need to take at least some blame. They've completely failed to offer something compelling to voters.
And I think what you're arguing, Nick, is very relevant, particularly with us going into the general elections 2024. We're going to see a much more aggressive election campaigns coming forward, manifestos being thrown all around. Young people who turn 18, who are eligible to vote, would need to have an option, or at least a fair view of who is the most prospective, or rather the most best candidate to go for. You're saying that that choice is quite a difficult one to make at this stage.
Yeah, absolutely. You see more than 10 million South Africans who are registered voters just don't turn up, and that's just because they don't believe in anyone who's on the ballot sheet. And I mean, that's a huge black mark against our opposition parties, that they can't put something forward that actually resonates with voters. I think something that the DA in particular doesn't quite get is that to actually get support, you need to speak to voters in a way that resonates with their hearts and minds. You need to win people over, forge emotional connections with people. It's not at all a South African phenomenon. It's how politics works around the world. You see it. Who's come to power in the US over the past 10 years, it's all about building some kind of emotional connection, and that's something that our official opposition party is absolutely incapable of. So yeah, I think there's a huge gap in the market, I guess, for a party that can actually market themselves in a way that resonates with the average voter.
Do you think that title still holds, that the DA is the official opposition party? Looking at the inroads that the economic freedom fighters have made, like them or dislike them, the reality is they've certainly made a dent on the political landscape.
Yeah, so according to some polls, the DA is actually at risk of losing its official opposition title in next year's national elections. It seems unlikely, but it's definitely, the gap is narrowing between number 2 and number 3. So again, just a huge indictment on the official opposition's ability to appeal to voters.
Yeah, but do you see also this as a change in the political landscape, one, and secondly, the psyche of your voters? There isn't that blind loyalty, if you will. There are various choices, and the level of accountability where leaders are being held. The sentiment is now that you have to deliver. It's not just based on a historical gain, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're seeing just more and more voters become disillusioned in the voting process because they don't see many strong alternatives out there. And I think this is probably an unpopular opinion, but it's one that I'm starting to have myself, is that the only parties that are actually capable of growth are probably the smaller parties. And that's something that the opposition, the main opposition parties, don't like the sound of. They obviously want to grow their base themselves, but they seem to be almost ex-growth. Even the EFF in the local government elections lost votes compared to 2016 and the 2021 local government elections. It grew its share because more people didn't vote for the ANC and the DA than they did before. But it actually lost votes in the local government elections. So in my personal opinion, I feel growth is probably to be had in the smaller parties, and that those might become the most important parties going forward and the kingmakers in elections.
Absolutely. I mean, as we've seen with the coalition governments at municipal level, the Patriotic Alliance in particular, we have Kenny Kunene as the acting mayor of Johannesburg. Who would have thought? So I think the smaller parties, as you're saying, can be the decision makers when it comes to the national elections as well. Your view?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think also they'll become less small over time. Like I said, I think they're the only ones that offer any real growth prospects, to be honest, unless there's sort of radical change in the way the Democratic Alliance positions itself, or unless there's a big shift towards the EFF. But parties like the PA and Action SA and new ones like Rise Mzansi, to me, offer the biggest growth prospects out there and will become increasingly important. It doesn't. All right,
Nick, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much. I really do apologize. I'm eating into a fewer's time, but that's a columnist, Nick Hedley, who says that opposition parties are also partly to blame for the mess that South Africa is in.